Hello and welcome to Comic Island. My name is Arden, and today we're talking about Empire number 3. In my last little bit of catching up with last week's comics, I actually saved Empire for last, and I'm kind of glad I did because uh, this one is a real turning point for me. I liked the first issue of Empire and a lot of the early tie-ins. Some of the more recent tie-ins I've felt a lot more negative or outright neutral towards. And issue number 2 of Empire, I was wavering a little bit. And if you go back and watch my review of that one, while I liked the book, I was worried that it was possible we were going to basically be getting a alien invasion story on Earth as a crossover event, which feels like we've really done that sort of thing with Marvel quite a bit before. Okay, I'm getting a weird message from YouTube, and you guys might get a little bit of buffering, but things look pretty good on my end. Here, I will do a couple of things that might help. Okay. Anyways, so as we go into issue number 3, I have to say this is my first real hint of, well, yeah, it is just an alien invasion story. A lot of it is starting to become by the numbers. This book in particular read like a lot of individual issues I've read from both Marvel and DC crossovers, where it feels like this comic was a bit of a holding pattern, and we were just kind of moving things along from point A to point B, and this issue was clearly just planned out to be depicting the Cotati invasion before we move on to the next major plot point. And things are starting to become very average, in my eyes, very quickly for Empire, which is not great. So, the book opens on the invasion and stuff, and there are little moments I kind of like. Tony Stark is using this password, and Reed Richards is able to guess it because Stark is using a similar methodology to Johnny Storm. Stark takes that as a bit of an insult, and Reed Richards says normally he'd correct Tony on that and point out that the Human Torch is a lot smarter than he lets on, but he lets it kind of go because he could tell Tony is beating up himself more than his brother-in-law. So that's a cool moment, but then we kind of get into Stark really being hard on himself for the mistake of the Cotati, and I don't know, just kind of rings false given the situation. Certainly Tony has acted that way before, but I feel the better choice, writing-wise, would have probably just been to, like, have the Avengers own this mistake and just trying to fix it. I think most of these characters are old enough and experienced enough that at this point that's how they would react. Thinking about the Kree-Skrull War, if they made a similar mistake with the Cotati back then, they'd probably do that and be like, well, we didn't know any better, as Reed Richards says, but we gotta fight on. So that's like kind of the first bad sign, but then we kind of get into some stuff where like the 4 members of the Fantastic Four are divided up kind of among different points across Earth doing different things. I like that aspect of it. They're each kind of like paired off with different Avengers, and all of that's pretty neat. We also get a bit of a setup that I think kind of gives us an inkling into where we're going from here with this page, where the Cotati are kind of targeting Wakanda because of its vibranium-rich soil, which will empower them and I assume let them kind of use Earth as a bit of a springboard for invading the rest of the galaxy and beyond, which puts pressure on the Skrulls to destroy a star, which is like a big revelation, even though I kind of immediately assumed that based on the artwork of Empire number 2, because that's what they're talking about aboard the Kree-Skrull command ship, and that's all pretty boring. There's a good moment where the Hulkling has a choice to use the sword to try and power up Captain Marvel again, and she can potentially wipe out the blue area of the moon garden thing that the Cotati have grown. Instead, he gives the sword to T'Challa because he has faith that the king can use that sword without risking the life of an Avenger. It's something. But then, yeah, like I said, then they get the big reveal of their pyre weapon, which destroys a star. They treat it like a big deal, but like I said, I thought that was a reveal last issue. Then there is another slightly more significant reveal that is the one little flag of promise in this issue where Tanalath is revealed to be the Skrull Empress shapeshifting as the Kree, and they're planning on using this unified empire to empower her as this absolute ruler of the galaxy, like through her grandson. And but she's confronted about this by what's his face of the Kree, um, the Captain Glory, I believe, and he's kind of won over by her sense of order and building a big empire. But they both agree that Hulkling is a little too heroic for this and to do something about it. I think that aspect of it is where they could do something and is more along the lines of the more political sort of content I was hoping for out of Empire. But I have to be honest, it's also more of just like, oh, we're doing twists now, and we're going to just have a bunch of twists until whatever outcome they've planned out of all of this is eventually revealed, and that's about it. Andre Partridge is saying, how many times had Marvel's Earth been invaded again? I actually lost count at this point. Yeah, that gets into what I was saying about like it's starting to feel a little too similar to a lot of other stories. The whole plant aspect of it isn't that exciting. There is some cool parts of it where like they're reviewing basically the tie-ins and how they're acting in the Savage Land. They have all these moves in Wakanda. They mention all the business with Genosha. That's something, but not overly exciting. It does make it better than something like Secret Invasion, in my opinion, which I really didn't enjoy. But, well, Andre Partridge in chat has a great point. It's just another invasion story. War of the Realms is a way better invasion story, anyways. Yeah. So it falls somewhere in between those two. War of the Realms, I would say, is a much better invasion story that did a better job of having like these cool character moments and as Guardian themed superheroes and content than either of these two stories. It had that angle going for it for one thing, but even if you just take it as a standard of invasion stories, that was more interesting than Empyre and way more interesting than Secret Invasion. So there's like almost a scale going on here, and Empyre is right in the middle, which doesn't really pose that, well, it's just not great for it. I still haven't read all the War of the Realms tie-ins, so it's much more tempting for me to go back to those than to engage any further with the Empyre tie-ins, other than the ones I've ordered in the core series, which I've also already ordered and is probably worth me reviewing. But I am not going to recommend this, and unless Empyre starts showing some of its more earlier colors and ideas of being this more political content, I'm really not that into it. Although, like, to be fair, Instron Skills says the event is boring, but then after I started describing what's in this comic, he said I got to read this, so maybe there's something he's seeing in it. I really didn't. It felt like a lot of characters kind of playing up drama that didn't need to be played up. Mantis does show up, and she was that mysterious pilot from the last issue, like one of our viewers very astutely predicted. She talks about how maybe Koi can be saved and that Swordsman seems to be behind a lot of this, which is kind of interesting. But there just isn't enough here. And again, like the drama around Hulkling and the Inner Circle getting all annoyed by the Emperor's actions, I don't know, it just didn't feel, or more particularly the whole thing around the pyre, just didn't really engage me at all. Bad Mr. Box is saying War of the Realms was what part of the event. Well, it wasn't perfect, especially if you only go by the core series. It really doesn't feel like much. I've come to really appreciate it in hindsight, and maybe Empyre is doing that for me. And then Matt Box continues, so if Empyre is worse than that, yikes. Yeah, I really don't think a lot of people are going to like this, because even the things that I was liking about it and hoping about it, I don't think a lot of people would want or expect out of like a big crossover story like this. I could be wrong, but personally, I really just didn't get a lot out of this. Uh, Andre says the Kree Skrull alliance is a nice touch, but I wish they would actually explore that a bit more. Yeah, if you can't tell, that's what I was kind of hinting at. Like, I really wanted something more along those lines, more grounded in the politics of this empire. I'm glad it's not just the Kree Skrull invading the Earth. It's interesting that they're all kind of working together against this new threat, and that's where I was still hoping that could still be engaged with in a way that still also involved this alliance more than just some weirdness. Mr. Buck says the Kree Skrull alliance isn't believable. They've kind of gotten into the struggle behind that. I think it's more believable in the wake of like all of these big threats and disasters having to be faced, and this stuff going on with Earth and the history of these two empires and the things that have happened to them. I I don't think it was impossible. I think it could have been handled better. Let's put it that way. Or it could have been more of the crux of the story. Maybe it could have been more of the plot of the story. That's what I originally thought it was, based on like kind of the previews, or like my best possible version of this event, I guess, would be if they were trying to achieve the alliance, and that was something that like the Avengers and the Fantastic Four were involved in. Maybe Super Skrull, Tanlath, even if she is secretly the Emperor, like Empress, and a couple of other characters approach these two superhero teams, go over the respective history between these two groups, and maybe even involve the Cotati. And the goal is actually peace. And the big enemy and the central conflict is against this need for peace. So I wish that would have happened, but unfortunately, we really didn't get that out of this book. Andre's saying at least it's something new for the Korean Skrull, besides the two of them fighting with each other. Yeah, that's like an interesting part of it. It's cool seeing these characters and cultures merged, and these like major Korean Skrull figures interacting with each other and working together. And the inner circle is very committed to all of this and very much believes in all of this. And like I said, like that alliance seems like the most interesting aspect of it. It really felt like that would have been the setup. But early on, it was kind of clear we weren't going in that direction. And ever since then, it's been pretty disappointing. So, well, while I still want to say a wait and see approach, I'm actually definitely like downgrading my overall review of this event to say, like, hold off on buying it if you haven't yet until we get more of a sense out of this thing and whether or not it's worth engaging in any further. Which is pretty disappointing because I had high hopes for Al Ewing. You know, I've made my opinions on Dan Slott clear, but Al Ewing I've always liked, and it's pretty upsetting to see him kind of backslide into a lot of old habits seen from a lot of other writers across these Marvel crossover events. I still maintain I believe he is the one who handles the lion's share of writing this Empyre event, and Dan Slott's like kind of just bouncing ideas off of him and helping out with certain aspects of what he has planned for the Fantastic Four. But beyond that, it really doesn't seem to be engaged with much more. Valerio Schitti's artwork, along with Marte Garcia's coloring, is really remarkable. And once again, I get like frustrated looking at cool pages and flashbacks to past events, like involving the Kree and the Skrull or other content across the like Marvel line featuring these tie-ins and such. Skitty does an amazing job at making that stuff look really cool, but unfortunately it doesn't really come together in the story, and once again a writer feels like he's letting down an excellent art team in one of these event comics, and that's a real shame. So yeah, that's about it. I don't really have much else to say. If it's not clear by now, I'm giving a clear not recommended signal for this book. I will still review the rest because I ordered the whole series. One way or another, I feel it's worth us reviewing the book. Um, but that's because our role in this is a little different. As far as you guys are concerned, no, I don't think it's worth your time or money. We had a lot of other cool stuff come out this week, new series, new ideas. Pulp was by far my favorite, I would say, but even then, there was a lot of cool new energy coming out of the X-Men and their own stuff that I think is more engaging. And as we look at the other at the plans I have, like, or sorry, not the plans, that the comics I'm getting tomorrow, basically, because I'm so behind on this thing, I think it's more promising. So, speaking of which, let's go over that right now. I'm just opening that. Oh, I didn't record it. Oh, that's next week. Oh, so looking at next week, it's actually pretty light, but we spent a lot of time with Marvel this week, so I think that's appropriate that we kind of turn over to, well, presumably Empyre number 4, but more significantly, Batman number 96 as the Joker War continues, and probably the one that we should. Huh? Dead Planet, which I put as number 12, which doesn't make sense. Hold on a second, let me look this up. Oh, number 2. There we go. Yeah, I was going to say, there's no way we're on number 12. Yeah, so DC's Dead Planet is the next issue of that particular series is coming out, and I'm looking forward to that quite a bit. Warren Kearney says, I don't know that it's a bad idea for an event. It's that Marvel doesn't play these things up to be exciting enough to be worth reading. It becomes another event that I won't waste money on. Yeah, like I said, it feels like the Kree Skull Alliance is a really cool idea that should have been the central focus of this, and that would have been a pretty good hook, because it's like, well, that has huge ramifications and wouldn't have has never happened before, and if it was more of a focal point here, that would have been interesting. I don't know why they decided to so heavily involve the Cotati. It could have been a cool sort of external threat that's still really focused on the Kree and the Skrull, but it seems like they've overplayed their hand, and it's really just about these plant people now, and I don't care about that. It's good of Marvel to want to, and like I guess Al Ewing or whatever, but whoever's decision this is, to want to build up alien races beyond just the Kree and the Skrull. That's smart, but if you're going to do that, you should advertise it and feature these plant aliens in a more interesting way or something. And B, like, it's got to be more than just a big shot, like, spread page of a bunch of heroes and aliens fighting each other. That's just not exciting. Bad Mr. Box says, if they can't make it a comic event that gets you hooked comic after comic, then the event shouldn't be made. I agree. This gets into like how it's planned and stuff. I really feel now like they said, okay, it's going to be however many issues long, and then this is just kind of filling in time before we get into what's probably the end game of this ending, which is really truly disappointing, because an event doesn't have to read like that. I don't think death metal is going to be like that, and I'm hoping events like Axe of Swords aren't like that. I Am True Skills says, I think Thor is the best series out of Marvel right now. I've certainly been enjoying it. I am still a couple of issues behind, but hopefully I'll be caught up soon, and we can start talking about that. Joey is also making recap videos of those, which is great, and we do have more recap videos and stuff planned. I've just been a little bogged down lately, so it's mostly just been these review-heavy streams. Yeah, so that's all I really had to say, and that's all chat seems to be going for, so I think we'll call it there. But thanks for those of you who've joined me for this review and the previous reviews. I like doing these and stuff, and like I said, it's good filler when it's really hard to get out content on certain weeks and stuff, and I've just had a lot going on over the last few weeks, and I've still got a couple more weeks of that, unfortunately, but hopefully it'll clear up after that a little bit and things will calm down. It's just that it's a weird year for everyone, you know? Not much we can do about that, but I'm doing okay and stuff, so yes, hopefully that's all right. Unfortunately, it looks like we've had some connection issues throughout the stream, so hopefully it's not too buffering or we haven't lost any video through all of this. but no one's really brought it up in chat, so I don't know about that. Oh, hey, Impulse Thunder, thanks for joining us. He's saying my theory was a lie. It was Mantis, not Star-Lord. Yeah, someone else said Star-Lord for the Empyre 2 stream, and Mantis, and they nailed it. Mantis made a lot of sense given the overall plotline and stuff, but Star-Lord would have been interesting. I was very skeptical of Star-Lord because Al Ewing's right now writing Guardians, and they're doing very different things at the moment. I'm quite enjoying Ewing's Guardians of the Galaxy series, by the way. I think I'm behind on that now, but it had a cool setup with like him, the Guardians going up against Greek gods, and they're featuring pretty cool characters. The Undead Mew says, I'm afraid X of Swords is going to be bloated. They increased the number of issues, so I don't know. There's a lot of issues. I'm kind of assuming you don't have to read every single issue. If you're expected to, well, then it's definitely bloated. But I've read events that have way more comics than that, like Civil War, and I've read all those tie-ins, and it had the weight of like a big concept idea enough that it worked for all those tie-ins, because you had this big issue and every character was going to fall on a different side of that issue. So there was a lot of cool content across those tie-ins. It's kind of why I like the first Civil War so much. X of Swords, given what's going on in the world of X-Men and stuff, feels like it could capitalize on that and do something interesting. I don't really know what X of Swords is going to be about. I haven't looked into it too much, so I can't speak to if it's like going to be this big and broad idea or if it's going to be this boring event. And Bad Mr. Box is saying X of Swords is probably going to have a lot of boring fillers. Yeah, it could very easily go in that direction, or have a lot of very easily skippable fillers. And it is kind of unclear what's going to be worth reading about that. Impulse Thunder is saying X of Swords is going to have a Marvel Tales featuring some older Captain Britain stories. The main event has about 24 issues, and that's it. Yeah, like I said, that's not too much. I've heard people complain about that, and it's like, well, if that's like the core story, that could be a very epic story. Like, there's been stuff I like that's like 52 issues long that's like covering a singular event, kind of like 52, and I enjoyed it. So issue length isn't necessarily a concern of mine. It's like whether or not it's a cash grab. How much of it is going to be filled of books like Empyre number 3 that feel like they're kind of just treading water. Apollinaire Amyot says, I work at a comic book store and only one person has this on their pull list. And Bad Mr. Box says, yikes, to that comment. And I agree, that's pretty low. I've noticed that there aren't like a lot of tie-ins being carried. And yeah, even personally, I've kind of pulled back on like ordering any more of these tie-ins or anything beyond what I've already ordered, basically. And out of that, we'll see what I get. But I'm not sold on this series anymore. You guys collectively, my audience, like our audience here at Comic Island, feels like I've just caught up with you guys. As far back as number 1, there's been a lot of comments and concerns about this story, and a lot more misgivings. And all I can say about that is you guys were right. Certainly, there's plenty of reasons to be more cynical and skeptical of Marvel events at this point. You all had perfectly good reason to feel that way. I think Al Ewing is the only reason I gave it so much more of a benefit of a doubt. And I guess I had to stop doing that, because even potentially good writers seem to get into this mill of these Marvel events. And I guess a lot of attention is paid to what has to be done in this event. They're told they have to do things. I know like Rick Remender didn't have a great experience with it. And even though I found Axis pretty good on the whole, though, I think they just have produced this system that creates these bad events more than it doesn't. I had hoped they had sort of fixed it between Absolute Carnage, War of the Realms, House of X. I had been pretty optimistic lately. Empire reads so much more like some of their earlier tie-ins, though. Some of the worst ones among them. I mean, we've all talked about which ones those are at this point a lot. We've made whole videos on that, so I'm not going to go through all that again. Uh, Impulse Thunder says they canceled a bunch of the tie-ins. The 4-1 was marketed as a major key story factor, but that was canceled. It's a shock, to be honest. Is his comment? Yeah, I that's unfortunate and kind of speaks to how superfluous the Thor thing feels. They even sort of mention it in this story, talking about how Thor is on some mystical quest. It's probably just some weapon that he's going to retrieve that he could use at the end of this thing, and doesn't seem to involve anything with King Thor or whatever. And I don't know how that timeline all lines up. Doesn't seem to. So my only response to that is to just shrug my shoulders and just say whatever. Like to that apparent discrepancy. I agree with Impulse. Amyant says, to be fair, we're pretty small. I ordered several of Marvel incoming, and now I have none sold. Oh wow. Yeah, I guess it really depends on like where you're situated and what your volume is and stuff. I really wouldn't know what my local shop does in terms of numbers along these lines. You kind of can get a sense of it out of the shelves. I can tell you that they are definitely investing a lot more copies of like Batman for the Joker War. I'm sure Death Metal, they had a bunch of issues left over from the first two of those. I assume number 3 is going to be a big order. I haven't seen I did notice there wasn't a lot of Empire copies floating around last week, so that does say a lot. I'm not saying, dang, I like cosmic stories with Thor. Yeah, that is a shame if it was done well or right. I kind of get why these things got canceled. Empire does have the extra challenge of dealing with having a release around COVID, but that shouldn't excuse the quality of the story. That would be a frustrating point if this was a good story and it wasn't selling as much as it should. Now it's just a bit of a relief. Hopefully Death Metal's doing well though, because I've enjoyed that so far. But we got issue number 3 coming out tomorrow. Hopefully that's not a similar letdown, but I'm not gonna let my hopes of that story like delude me from what I would expect out of it. And I want it to be good, obviously. Like, we can't hold back just because of what we want. And Death Metal very much could face plant, especially because Scott Snyder, the writer of that series, is not great at endings. And I talked about that a lot in my review of the first book, and it remains an ongoing point of skepticism about Death Metal. But so far, I'm enjoying the ride. And one thing I was thinking about, even something like Black Stars Above, which I just reviewed and will be up on the channel shortly. Sometimes, like, I was pretty disappointed about Black Stars' ending, and I was thinking whether or not the journey was enough to kind of make up for a relatively lackluster ending. And in the case of Black Stars, I don't feel that was entirely the case. I didn't hate it, but I found the ending disappointing and the story too contingent on the ending for that to matter. Empyre doesn't feel like it has offered enough so far to make a disappointing series going forward worth indulging in at all. Death Metal, on the other hand, is quite different from that. I would say Death Metal's offered enough content that it would have to really nosedive from here on out to be a major source of disappointment to me. So I think we're going to call it there. Thanks a lot for watching, everybody, and we'll see you tomorrow for next week's pull. I am sorry things kind of fell behind, but just the way my shifts lined up, it wasn't possible otherwise. Plus, I had a couple of big trades last week, which slowed me down a bit, especially Black Stars. Not that it was hard to get through, it's just it was a real read. Because it had some pretty sophisticated content that I really felt like I had to digest. Unlike Empyre, which I polished off in like less than 10 minutes. I don't know, less than average for what I normally would read a comic book in, because you have to soak in Arden stuff. And even then, I just flew through this thing because there really isn't much to it. Think about, like, I kind of recapped what's in this comic and think about how quickly I got about that in this stream. That was nothing because there isn't a lot to this story. Just a bunch of silly character moments that I felt didn't live up to characters like Iron Man or, like, I guess Hulkling. There's someone else. What was the other point of contention? Oh, right, like all the characters in the Skrull throne room, including Hulkling, around that whole pyre thing. All of that really kind of let me down. But Live to Rock says Empyre has major pacing problems since number zero. Stuff has barely happened. Yeah, number zero is where there was the most energy for sure. I feel like issue number one had enough momentum going that if it was used properly, it would have been just fine as like a springboard to the rest of the event. It's like we really have lost our footing with these last two issues. And even number two had its moments, and I was really hopeful it was like, again, kind of propelling us to something better. But we're too far in at this. Like three was a key issue. It really had to show, like I said earlier, like better colors and more ideas for this event to at all be worth engaging in. I tried to make that clear in my review of issue number two. George Juilliard says if this does not lead to the return of Marvel, then it is a waste. The thing about that, though, is they've flirted with that idea so much. I don't really personally care that much. I could see very much that happening at the end of this story, but like that was teased in the first Civil War, a bunch of other stories. Like it was part of that crazy event with the Cancerverse and stuff, and it doesn't feel like a big deal if Captain Marvel comes back anymore, or Marvel, I should clarify. Like, I've never been a huge fan of that character. He had died long before I really got into comics and stuff, so I don't personally have much of an emotional attachment, and I've never really gone back and read a Captain Marvel story that left me super enthusiastic about that particular character. Maybe I should look into that and figure out what so many people like about him because he's very popular. Uh, George says, okay, how about Genis? I'm not even sure who that is, to be honest. I'm not the biggest expert on Cosmic Marvel. I'm a relatively late comer. I came in like around the revival of the Guardians of the Galaxy before their movie. That's kind of my era and what I know of that time period. And oh, Genis Val. Okay, yeah, like I don't know. It just doesn't seem like that big a deal to me. Maybe other people will care. I don't think so because I feel like if I don't care, the average or lower level, well, I don't want to say lower level, but like a more casual reader who like mostly just cares about the Avengers, maybe the Guardians of the Galaxy, like what are they going to care about any of these characters at all? And I don't necessarily fault them for it. Like what reason in the last 2 decades have they been given to care? Steven was saying his death was pretty tragic. Yeah, I do like that aspect of it. Even I know about that where it's like, no, he just died of cancer. That, oh, what's his face guy exploded it. The explodey guy did it. I want to say Nova, but that's not it. I'm blanking on the villain's name. That's pretty ballsy. And it was a death that lasted, as George points out. And I kind of agree. Like that still had significance, even as someone who like I clearly don't know that much. Nitro, that's it. Yes, Nitro. I should know that because I was just talking about like in the stream Civil War, but whatever. Forgive me for not knowing like a T, right? Well, I don't know. Nitro's kind of a cool character, and I don't want to write him off because he's pretty badass. He's got like an actual track record for a relatively unknown villain. Which I think is pretty neat, and he's been in some cool comics that I quite enjoyed. Alrighty, so thanks a lot for joining me and chatting with me with some comics, and I'll see you guys tomorrow, probably early afternoon because I do have to work in the evening. But oh, Steven was saying, have you read the X-Men Empyre crossover? I thought it was a miss personally. I depends on which one you're talking about. I thought the Genosha one certainly has some cool ideas going on, even if it was a little messy. I thought X-Men number 10, which is also an Empyre crossover, was more disappointing and didn't really have much to it the way I was kind of hoping. Even though it did set up some things, but I don't even like remember a lot of the details of it now a few days after reviewing it, or well, maybe more than a few days, but like if oh, Steven was saying I like what they did with Vulcan. Yeah, that aspect of it was cool. I just expected more to do with like the gateways and stuff like that. The Genosha stuff felt like it was more significant. I think okay. I should clarify, yeah. I liked the dive into Vulcan's character and I talked a lot about how it's cool they're featuring those characters, but the stuff with like the stuff involving Empyre felt superfluous to the look at Vulcan. But I am glad we get a focus on more obscure X-Men characters for sure, and that's always cool to see. And yeah, it's a real shame Marvel can't seem to avoid really pulling off a proper crossover, and I you'd think they would learn their lesson and I don't know, maybe change how they go about these things. I really think the biggest thing they need to do is slow them down, because if you look at their rate, it actually has increased to about two a year where it was once one, and even one felt like too much, and it's always just been too much. Sometimes we'll get a break of sorts where like Secret Wars kind of was on its own for a year because it was so big. Um, and Secret Wars was also built up nicely. Yeah, earlier in the stream, we talked about how the alliance between the Empyre factions feels like it should have been a bigger deal than been built up. If it was built up across more comics, that would have been more of a thing. Bad Mr. Box says, imagine how screwed the X-Men are if Krakoa is a seed of the space planet people. I was hoping for more content like that, and I thought that was queued up like right away. I think in Empyre number 2 when their portals looked so similar. It very much seems like it's going to be followed up on to some extent, but I thought that could have been a major plot point, and instead it just seems like a weird detail. Maybe like not Krakoa is part of them, but that they certainly would have some sort of relationship with it, or maybe Krakoa would be sympathetic to the Cotati or something. I don't know. It's weird that it's barely been brought up so far, though. George is saying the Secret Wars build reminded me of the DC slow burn towards Infinite Crisis build. Yeah, I think building up events like that certainly can increase their scope and scale, but they only really do it at the maximum level of event. It, I wish it happened more often in general. Something like Monsters Unleashed works fine on its own. Absolute Carnage got built up through the Venom series, and that felt like it worked really well because it was very much a Venom story. You could bring it along the tie-ins for that ride, which was great. Axis is a similar thing where it was built up across Remender's Uncanny Avengers series, and I think that more or less worked in spite of little issues, and the whole thing with Quicksilver and Scarlet, which from back in that day really not looking great in hindsight, but whatever, it's pretty fun. Oh, Steven makes a great point. They picked the Young Avengers character for an event. My boy Speed needs some love. I think they should have just involved the Young Avengers more in general. Bringing like tying one in randomly feels a little disappointing, and I wish they used those awesome characters in a better way. Even Hulkling really hasn't had much to do, and while I liked his little tie-in so far, that's been the most engagement we've gotten out of that character, and it's all just kind of bringing him into Empyre. And even then, it was okay. It was pretty standard for a tie-in, and the first sign that we were really going to go in that direction, looking back on it now. So it's a real shame, and I think we'll leave it there so I can work on some other stuff tonight and try and catch up on some work a little bit. But yeah, thanks again, guys, and I'll see you next time here on Comic Island. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and keep reading comics.